Last month, Baroness Ashton, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, went to Tehran against all of our advice. She went there setting foot on Iranian soil on the 8th of March, which ironically was International Women's Day. 4 days earlier, the mullahs had hanged a 25-year-old girl who'd been in jail since the age of 15, and she left behind a daughter when she was hanged. They have in prison just now a 26-year-old girl who's been in jail for the past 7 years and is about to be hanged for resisting being raped by the thugs from the Basiji. I wonder when Baroness Ashton sat down with the so-called moderate President Rohani, the smiling face of the moderate progressive Iran, if she raised these questions, if she raised the fact that the Mullah Supreme Court has ordered a man to be blinded and have his nose and ears cut off. I wonder if she raised the fact that since Rohani was elected last August, 700 people have been executed, many of them hanged in public. You know, Iran's record on women's rights is globally renowned. Mrs. Rajavi's own sister and her husband, when her sister was pregnant, were executed, were shot. This is the real mullah's regime, and this is the real smiling, moderate Rohani. And you know, on the day she arrived, the Israelis stopped a vessel, they intercepted a vessel carrying ground-to-ground rockets, missiles, thousands of bullets and armaments, heading for the terrorists linked to the Iranian regime in Gaza. So her visit almost fell apart as soon as she arrived at the airport. It's a farce. They are the biggest exporters of terror in the world, the mullahs regime. They are now exporting arms to their puppet Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq, and he is using Iranian weapons to wage genocidal war on the Sunni population in Al-Anbar province. He's reducing the cities of Fallujah and Ramadi to rubble as we sit here. And the Americans are supplying weapons to allow Maliki to kill his own people. 2 weeks ago, he flattened the hospital in Fallujah, killing dozens of nurses, doctors, and patients. And he tells the world, I'm waging a war against terror, against terrorists, and the Americans pile in the weapons. They sell the weapons, so the Americans are making some money out of this grisly trade. But this is the Iranian regime providing weapons to Maliki, Maliki allowing a free passage for arms and personnel to go through Iraq to bolster the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And what's the West doing about it? We seem to have refocused our attention. I think there's a general embarrassment where people say we should never have been involved in the war in Iraq in the first place. It was an illegal war. We were tricked by Tony Blair and George W. Bush. And after they both announced mission accomplished, as soon as the troops left Iraq, we've washed our hands of the whole bloody affair, and our focus is now on Syria, where Western, UN, EU, US policy is a disaster, and on Crimea, where at this very moment there is a massive Russian military buildup on the border of eastern Ukraine, and we could be staring at a new invasion of a sovereign country that wants to join the EU. So I have a message for the leaders of these three great peacemaking institutions: the EU with Baroness Ashton, Ban Ki-moon at the UN, and John Kerry and his boss, Barack Obama in the US, you have failed miserably in dealing with the crisis in Syria. You've failed to stop Vladimir Putin's move into Crimea and potential move now into the rest of eastern Ukraine. You have washed your hands of the disaster that is now Iraq, rapidly heading towards civil war and becoming day by day a failed state. You have abandoned the 3,000 people in Camp Liberty to their fate, having collectively, the EU, the US and the UN, put pressure on us and on me personally to persuade Mrs. Rajavi and the people in Camp Ashraf that they had to move to Camp Liberty so that they would be quickly registered as refugees and in what I was told would be a revolving door, quickly taken out of Iraq to a country of safety. Here we are 2 years later. 300 of the original 3,300, 10%, have actually left Camp Liberty. And because of our efforts, not a single one has left because of a finger being raised by the UN, the US, or the EU. We get all these envoys, we get the horrendous intervention of Martin Kobler, thankfully now sent to the Congo, and I hope he doesn't return from there in a hurry, who did his utmost to undermine all of the efforts we were making to rescue the people in Camp Liberty. And yet here we are 2 years later, 3,000 people held in prison-like conditions. I spoke to the daughter of a lady who's in Camp Liberty on Wednesday and came to our Friends of a Free Iran event. And she said that her mother has an eye infection like dozens of other people in Camp Liberty because of the contaminated water supply. And they are denied access to medicines. She said her mother is told that you have an appointment with the doctor in Baghdad, you have to be at the gate of Camp Liberty at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And at 9 in the morning, her mother, who is almost crippled and finds it difficult to walk on the gravel, there are no proper boardwalks in the camp, finds it difficult to get to the gate, and then is told to stand in the heat and the sunshine for hours because the camp guards deny her the right to leave to go and see her doctor. And then finally, she gets a call to say, I'm afraid your doctor's appointment is over now, you've missed it. And she has to walk back into the camp. And this is the kind of psychological torture going on day after day. They deny access to foodstuffs on some occasions, to proper clean water. The sewage system is contaminated and breaking down and flooding the camp regularly. And these people are not allowed to have their own hard hats and armoured vests, thousands of which are lying back in Camp Ashraf. We have had, after the repeated attacks on these people who are sitting ducks because the 17,500 concrete T-walls were removed before they were allowed to enter the camp, and after repeated protests from us, a few hundred T-walls have been put back, but the vast majority of the T-walls were sitting outside the wall of the camp, but recently were taken away altogether in order that any UN or UNHCR people couldn't witness them, take photographs of them and demand their erection inside the camp. So they're sitting ducks. 112 of them have been killed, murdered in repeated attacks and massacres. The massacre of 52 of the residents of Camp Ashraf last year, handcuffed and executed. Even the wounded executed on the hospital trolleys in the clinic in Camp Ashraf. And what did the West do? Eshton demanded that Nouri al-Maliki should have a full investigation and hold to account those that he discovered were responsible. That's like asking King Herod to take charge of the nursery. That's ludicrous. Since the very first massacre in Camp Ashraf, after the Americans reneged on their deal to provide safety and security for every individual and walked away from that agreement, walked away from that pledge, since that very first massacre, we have not had a single inquiry by Maliki into any of the murders. Not a single thing has been done. Because he is the perpetrator of these crimes. And he should be held to account, ladies and gentlemen. He and Rouhani and Khamenei should be brought before the International Court of Justice and made to stand trial for the crimes against humanity. So my message really to the EU, the UN and the US is, after all these collective global failures, wouldn't it be nice to have a little success? At the stroke of a pen, you could get all 3,000 people out of Camp Liberty today. Whether my plea will be listened to is another question. But it's because we have brave people like you, the courageous people who have backed the PMOI for years in many cases. It's because we have these 3,000 people on the front line of the opposition to the mullah's corrupt and brutal regime in Iran that we know that there is a dawn coming after the blackness of the night that we have suffered, that the Iranian people have suffered for so long. The courageous people of Camp Liberty and the courage and fortitude and dynamic energy of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi will prevail. Fascism and the kind of cruel dictatorships that we now see in both Iran and Iraq can never prevail. The good will win, and I want to join with Mrs. Rajavi and all of you in the day we walk into Tehran and declare freedom, justice, democracy. And I want to say to all of you at the end of this presentation, I am Ashrafi.